I invite you to turn on the back of the worship bulletin, if you would like, to the outline. As I've shared each Sunday, this is an outline that I borrowed from another person's sermon, and I'm filling in the blanks with things that I feel have spoke to me this week as I've studied. Some of you have enjoyed this sermon series, and I know my daughters enjoy the fact that I've been organized, so that's a good thing. As you borrow other people's structure, I guess that's a good thing. But I would like to remind you today of what we have encountered as we have watched Jesus these past few weeks encounter persons that are hurting, persons in need of healing, persons in need of forgiveness, persons in need of a growth in their faith. The first Sunday we realized that Jesus did not come to focus on rules, but relationships. Once again, we are reminded of that in this text because we find the religious people today, once again, all caught up in their rules, even questioning the way that this man received his sight. And when they discover that Jesus used mud on the Sabbath, they immediately say, he can't be a God. He's broken the law of the Sabbath. He's worked. It's interesting to note that how particular the religious people were that day, that if you were, forgive me for being rather graphic, but it was okay for you to spit on a rock on the Sabbath. But if you were to spit in the dirt to make mud, that was considered to be a sin. How about that? Now, before we get all about how these religious people of that day were focused on the wrong thing, for just a brief moment, let's think, each of us, about some of the rules that we have in our life that we judge other people by that may be very similar to that, if you allow me to share that. But we focus about how Jesus didn't come to focus on rules, but instead on relationships. And then we begin to look at the fact that Jesus came not to judge, but to forgive. That Jesus did not come to make people feel guiltier and guiltier or to single people out because of the badness in their life, the sin, the brokenness, but instead Jesus came to forgive and to heal and to move people from that place of hurt to a place of healing. And then we, just last Sunday, thought about the fact that Jesus came to speak the truth. Today, Rick stood here and he spoke the truth. He lifted up the reality that many of us would rather just to keep in the newspapers with this statistics to remind us about things that are touching the lives of our youth and the lives of our families, and that is the truth. But Jesus didn't come just to speak the truth. He came to show us the power of truth to make a difference. Once again, to shift the focus from circumstances to people. Jesus came to change lives. And today we find him revealing himself to a man who was born blind. And we find that this man is gently but very firmly guided to move from a place of beginning to see Jesus as a prophet and a teacher to ultimately seeing Jesus as Lord of his life. So as we encounter this text and as we allow it to speak to us, let us see first and foremost that as Jesus encounters the people in the beginning of this chapter 9, we find him first with his disciples, and we find these disciples caught up in this either-or thinking. They're all focused on, well, who sinned here? Here's a man who was born blind. Is it because his parents sinned, or was it because God knew that at some point in the future this man would sin? Who is at fault here? Either this or that must have happened. But what we find is that Jesus said, you're asking the wrong questions. It's not a matter of who is to blame here. It's not a matter of an either or. It's more about what if in the midst of life we allow God to become part of the circumstance. Jesus represented God to this situation, and Jesus continues to represent God's interaction in our own lives. For just a moment, I'd like for you to think about what would you like to see in your life? What differences, what things would you like to find in your life to be different than they are right here today? Are you caught up in an either-or circumstance? Are there some of you that would like to see your marriages be better? Some of you like to have better relationships with your parents, or parents, better relationships with your youth. Would you like to see that happen? Would you like to see things in your life being different? Would you like to see yourself becoming a person of greater faith and more involvement in sharing Christ with others? Are there things in your life that you would like to see? Allow your hearts and your minds today to be open to that new possibility, instead of perhaps being caught up in this either-or that kind of goes like this. Either I'm going to give in to the peer pressure at school, or I'm going to live a rotten life at school. I'm going to be branded a goody two-shoe. Or perhaps that I'm going to find that persons will not relate to me in the same way. That's either or. Either I am going to stay in this job that is miserable, or I'm going to have to discover how to get along with a lot less money. Either I am going to have to make more money, or I'm going to have to become more protectionistic about my family and think just about us. You see, all of that leaves us feeling trapped, leaves us saying, why me? Instead of allowing God to break through that and say, but what if God gets into the midst? Is it possible that I can allow God to move me to a place that I cannot even see today? To move me to see that perhaps instead of giving in to the peer pressure, not only as youth but as adults, but instead of giving in, that I find that God strengthens my faith to find new ways to reach out to those who are pressuring me. Is it possible that God wants us to break through our either-or thinking to realize that there are some relationships that perhaps we have given up on, that if we allow God in the mix, things may change? We find Jesus here in this account not even waiting for the blind man, to ask for help. You know, Jesus is all about helping us wherever we are and whatever circumstance we are. But in this instance, he comes to this man and he offers him a solution to his blindness. But he must receive it. I mean, let's be honest. Here's a man who has been born blind. When he hears a voice that says, here, let me put mud on your eyes, go wash it off and you can see, what do you think that man was thinking? I know what I would have thought. I would have thought, does this person, whoever he is, really think that a little mud can make me see? I mean, I've washed my eyes thousands of times. Why? This isn't going to work. This can't work. I mean, it's illogical. Why should it work? But what we find is this man, in obedience, does exactly what Jesus tells him to do, and he transforms an ordinary act into an extraordinary event. Have you ever felt God prodding you to do just something really ordinary? Perhaps prodding you to pick up the phone and make that phone call that you have not made for many weeks, because you know that the person on the other end is not going to listen to you, so you just haven't done it. You haven't written that letter or an hour day at a time, emailed somebody who you feel you probably should have reached out to. Have any of us failed to do the ordinary just because we felt like it really couldn't make a difference? But by not doing what God prods us to do, we are preventing God to perhaps do a miracle, heal a relationship, restore a brokenness, bring forgiveness, bring acceptance.